time just to go through, if you can tell me your name, where and when you were born.
Right. I'm Douglas Weatherall. Are you shooting now? I'm Douglas Weatherall. I was born in Seam Harbour, County Durham in September 1932, and I've been associated with the North East for a long, long time, particularly as a newspaperman.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents? What did your father do?
My father, for 25 years, worked down Dorden Colliery as a coal hewer. He had passed for the grammar school, or the secondary school as it was then, that I was to attend, Rye Hope Secondary School. But in those days, they used to do interviews. He went to the interview, and the first question he was asked is, what does your father do for a living? He says, I don't have one. He died when I was 12. And your mother? She died when he was 10. He didn't get into that school. He left Seam Upper Standard School at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at the age of 14. He was working down Dorden Colliery at 10 o'clock that night. He worked for 25 years. He didn't like working in the pit. He had the intelligence to have done far better for himself through the Workers' Educational Association. He did do better for himself. He became a rent collector first for Seam Council, and then he progressed to being a housing officer for Seam Urban Council. That was my dad. I'm the youngest of 3 children.
Did anyone in your family serve in the First World War?
My grandfather, one of my grandfathers, had the one that didn't die when he was relatively young. That grandfather had served for a long time in the army, including the First World War.
Did you have a happy childhood, and what was it like growing up in Seam?
I had a terrific childhood. I've been invested in sport all my life, and in season we would play football and cricket, and that's carried on. My interests, main sporting interest, is retained, and I'm now 84 years old.
Can you remember the build-up and the outbreak of war?
My first real memory of the war was my dad was the deputy head warden for Seam. He had the helmet and the white helmet like they are on Dad's army. And I was with him with the threat of war coming. It was expected, and he was on standby as a warden. And I remember going with him to the warden's post, as it was called, at Seam Urban Council. And we listened to Mr. Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, announcing that war had been declared. And I would, of course, then I wasn't quite 7 years old, but I remember that vividly. And then my next real memory of the war was the Anderson shelters being delivered. The shelters which my older brother, he was very handy. I'm not handy at all, by the way, but he was very handy. And he dug the hole for about 4 feet down, and he put the Anderson shelter in the garden, and then covered it with earth and flowers, in fact. And I was to sleep in there quite regularly. And when the air raids were on, and then because of the air raids, my mum decided that I should be evacuated, and my sister Jean, who was 4 years older than me, she and I went to me Aunt Frances in Stratford-on-Pornhaven, Shakespeare country and all that, and I was picturing this thatched roof and all that, like Anne Hathaway's cottage, like heck it was. It was 20 Bull Street, terraced, and oh dear me. I mean, we lived in a council house at Deanside Seam, which was palatial compared with that. And my vision of Stratford-on-Avon was ruined. But I stayed there 3 weeks. But to be honest, I was homesick all the time. And my mum kept a letter which I'd written in pencil, and I apologised for wasting 16 shillings and and a penny halfpenny on the train, but I wanted to come home and I was ready to face the bombs again. And funny enough, that letter is somewhere up in my loft still, returned from your mum, who's obviously dead these days. And but that's another of my memories. But I remember when I was at Stratford-on-Avon, they used to have the Wings for Victory and dig for victory and all that, weeks to raise national savings money and all that. And I remember being in the children's choir while I was attending for 3 weeks the school in Stratford-upon-Avon. But I was glad to get back to going to Deanside Junior Mixed.
Did any of your family join the armed forces, and where did they serve?
Well, me dad, when war broke out, since he'd been a miner, he had the chance to go back to work in the pits. But he disliked the pits so much. I mean, he was never cut out for it really, because he was a very intelligent man. He was a very well-read man. And he preferred to go in the army, and he was in the Royal Artillery. And he served most of his time on the south coast in heavy ack-acks. First of all, trying to shoot down bombers, German bombers, and then later the what do you call them? I forgot. Doodlebugs, the doodlebugs. He was trying to shoot down doodlebugs. They were harder to shoot down, by the way, than German Heinkels, etc.
Was there anyone in the family in the Home Guard?
No, as I say, my dad was a warden, but our family wasn't in the Home Guard. Our Jack joined the Army Cadets, but he didn't get called up because he was in essential work. He was a shipyard worker, a shipwright in the yards at Sunderland. That was his job.
Being on the coast, do you remember the Battle of Britain at all?
Oh, I mean, I remember all the raids. As I say, when they were at the height, my mum just used to prepare me bed in the shelter and go down there, and that's where we spent most of my nights, in the Anderson shelter. And actually, I can remember the landmines dropping fairly near us. We lived on the avenue at Deanside, Seaham, and then in one of the farmers' fields, this enormous bomb had dropped and left an enormous crater. Would you believe that eventually filled up with water? And one of my playmates, Jimmy Latham, who lived up the back of where I lived, he was drowned in that. He'd been trying to get on a raft and he was actually drowned in that in there.
Was the outbreak of war a shock to the system? What changes did it have for you as a child?
It wasn't a shock as such. We used to draw the aeroplanes and things like that. And if there'd been a raid, we would go and pick up bits of shrapnel and that type of thing. It was mainly like a normal boyhood. I still loved playing football and cricket. As I've said, I've liked that sort of thing all my life. Eventually, I was to write about football and cricket. Incidentally, I remember when my dad was in the army, I used to write letters to him, and I'd mainly tell him about how Sunderland had played in the wartime matches. And he used to write back. It was like reading the Football Echo. Eventually, I was to work for the Football Echo and the Sunderland Echo. That's where I started my journalistic career. He was well before his time. He forecast that I would be doing it.
Did you ever worry about what might happen?
I don't think I did, you know. I was a boy, and it was. I still did boyish things. And even after the raids, as I say, we'd go around picking up bits of shrapnel and whatnot, you know. It's, one gets used to these things.
And what about the threat of invasion? I've spoke to a few people who said, you know, they were always aware of the constant threat of Hitler might arrive.
Yeah, that was it. Well, of course, I mean, through my dad being a warden, they were prepared with how to react if there was an invasion, all that sort of thing. I mean, and of course, I remember the LDV, the local defence volunteers, who were the Home Guard. I remember I used to see them doing the drill, etc. It was, but the main things I remember were the air raids. I mean, the noise could be terrible, and my mum's used to be upset as soon as she heard the sirens, you know. Oh, the whining. And then it was a different whine for the start of the raid. And then there was the long one when the raid was over, the threat was over. And these things that stuck with me memory all my life.
Yeah. Can you tell me what the camaraderie was like in your community?
Sorry?
The camaraderie.
Oh, the camaraderie. It was, you've got to remember, it was a mining community. And the miners have had wonderful camaraderie anyway. And incidentally, I mean, to go off the tangent, there used to be the broadcasts about how to save things and make the most of things, and not to waste any food, all that sort of thing. My mum would listen to that and say, hey, we've been doing that all our lives, because we weren't well off. Hardly anybody in Same Harbour was well off. Blimey, I mean, there just used to be a few cars in the whole town. I mean, now you kind of get stirred for them. I mean, I never thought I would see, which I saw eventually, loads and loads of cars at every colliery where the miners would come to work. I mean, they always used to get the pit buses when I was a lad, you know.
What were the day-to-day conditions like?
As I said, I was a boy, and I enjoyed doing boyish things. And but sometimes I used to see some of the stuff on the news when we would go to the Cosy Cinema at the same colliery, and you'd see some of the raids and the effects of the raids. But of course, a lot of that was hushed up anyway for morale among the population. And even in those days, I realised that we might not be getting the full truth, you know. My goodness. But I mean, I can remember chaps coming back to see him after Dunkirk, for instance, and all that sort of thing. And them being greeted at home, and they're back for a short while, and then they're off again to war.
What were the changes to schooling?
Yeah, well, of course, that was another thing. They had the shelters built at school at Deanside. Actually, my mum used to complain because we used to play football in the schoolyard, and the thing was that they built a brick shelter just at the bottom of the schoolyard. That had soil on, but you can imagine what it was like when it rained. It used to become muddy and whatnot. And my mum used to get me turned out beautifully for school, and I'd come back hacky, as they said, down in County Durham, all muddy. My shoes were all muddy because we play football in the mud-stained play yard, you know, the playground. You know, things like that I remember. In that sense, the happy memories, not sort of forbidding ones, shall I say.
Can you remember when rationing came in? What was the food?
Oh,
what did you miss?
Oh, I can remember. Everything seemed to be short. Wayhills was a bread shop, and the word would go around. Oh, Wayhills have biscuits in. I mean, it was great to be able to get a biscuit now and again. There was a shortage of everything, and mind you, as I say, my mum and dad who make do and mend all our life, really. Although we'd always fed well. We didn't have much money, but we always fed well. And we seemed to manage all right. And I can still remember lovely smells of my mum's cooking, you know. The Sunday dinners, we still managed to get some sort of roast, you know.
Can you remember any funny incidents from the time?
I'm trying to remember funny incidents. In the main, a boy's life was fun. I mean, I started watching Sunderland when I was only 9 years old. I can still remember the very first game I saw at Roker Park, Sunderland. It was Sunderland versus Leeds United. And of course, in those days, a lot of the players were in the forces. And it just so happened that Rhys Carter, the wonderful inside forward of Sunderland, he was exactly, he'd got on leave and was playing for Sunderland the very first time I saw him, and I saw him get a hat-trick, and one of his goals I can picture now. I was standing in the clock stand, and this wonderful left foot shot from the angle of the penalty area, and he shot inside the far post. I was 9 years old. It's still there.
What was it like going to the matches in wartime?
Well, it's thrilling. I mean, I just used to love Saturdays, and if Sunderland were playing at home, and if they weren't playing at home, I'd go and see Sim Colliery Welfare play, or Dorton Colliery Welfare. I mean, I was later to play for Dorton Colliery Welfare Juniors. And of course, I mean, in the wartime, during the war, I passed me 11 plus, and I went to Ryhope Grammar School, the school that had rejected me dad because he was an orphan. You gather I'm a bit politically minded on that sort of thing. I like to think I've got a sense of fairness. That was unfair. Anyway, I got into school, and we had the most successful boys team at Ryhope Grammar School that the North East has ever known. It's still a record. We entered 8 competitions and won 7. And of course, that was just after the war. That was in the 46-47 season. But of course, I was there from about 1943, and that was wartime, you know. I mean, you remember we used to have gas masks and all that sort of thing, you know. As the war got on, we didn't seem to carry our gas masks as often as we'd previously carried them, because we were then in the process of winning the war, and the threat wasn't so great.
Was there ever a time you had to use them?
No, never known gas, thank God. I mean, they used to have they used to practice putting them on and all that sort of thing, you know, but never the real thing, thank goodness.
Was there any tragic incidents before your family?
I lost 2 uncles. I remember I was sitting one night listening to the wireless. We didn't have television, we were listening to the wireless. My mum was doing a hooky mat. You know the hooky mats? And there was a knock on the front door in the Avenue Deanside Same, and it was a policeman to tell us that my Uncle Harry, my mum's brother, had been killed. And we never used to worry about him because he was based in this country. Would you believe he was riding? He was a motorcyclist, dispatch rider in the Royal Engineers. He was a sergeant, and he was killed on the A1 between Ripon and Darlington by some vehicle which was on the wrong side of the road. The ones we worried about were my Uncle Eddie and my Uncle Jack. They were both in the Royal Navy. The next time we got bad news, it was Uncle Eddie. He'd gone down on the submarine Snapper. That's how he lost his life. And by the way, his son, my cousin Danny, is very well known. The people in that type of music will know all about him. Danny Thompson, he's a brilliant double bass player. He's in his 70s now, and he's, of course, he doesn't remember his dad. He was just a baby when his dad was killed. He was declared missing, presumed dead, and of course he was down the bottom of some ocean.
How did people cope with the fear?
With fear? You see, I can't remember people being frightened. It's funny, you get used to an environment, and the environment was we were at war. We didn't want to be at war, but somehow the British spirit, we coped, you know. I would guess perhaps I was too young to be fearful. Whereas my mum was always, especially after losing 2 brothers, she was always fearful that with the next knock on the door. What's it going to be? What news is it going to be? My dad didn't get out of this country as a soldier until just after the war. When towards the end of the war, he was stationed briefly in Germany. And but by then, we'd won.
Where were you the day it was announced the war was over? And what can you remember about it?
What I can remember was the street parties and all that sort of thing. They were lovely. And it was... and one of my great memories, actually, you perhaps don't know this, but I love music. And I can remember the BBC was celebrating, they were going right round Britain and what was happening. And I'll never forget hearing the people in Cardiff singing the Hallelujah chorus from Messiah. And I've always loved music. My dad was a good singer and he used to sing Messiah. And it was as if someone was conducting them. And this great celebration, you've heard about the Welsh being great singers. I can vouch they were great when the war was won. I remember them singing and celebrating by singing the Hallelujah chorus in the streets. It was a very happy time. And it was lovely as the fellas came back from the war, you know. It was a very emotional time, that. I think the whole nation had showed wonderful spirit during the war, but there was a great sense of relief afterwards.
And did it take long for your father to come back?
Yeah, well, my dad was demobbed and he returned to what he'd done before the war. He was working for the same council again, you know.
Do you often think back to that time?
Funny enough, not all that much really. It's a long time ago. A lot's happened in my life since then. Sunderland even won the cup. They'd won it in 1937. My dad had been down. He had his first trip to Wembley in 1937. This is 2 years before war was declared. And my memory of that, funny enough, he brought me back a weapon of war. It was a toy sword. And that was my first memory of football, really.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life after the war?
Well, I went to the school where my dad didn't get in. And I'm in the school. I'll advance forward I'm in the 5th form at Ryhope Grammar School. And the prefect tapped me on the shoulder and says, "The gaffer wants to see you." That meant the headmaster. I thought, oh, what have I done now? It was known for me to have to visit the headmaster. Anyway, I go to see him. I'm wondering what he's going to have to say to me. He said, "Oh, Weatherall," they never called you by your first name. "You'll be leaving school after you sit your school certificate, will you?" I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, what do you fancy becoming?" I said, "Well," I was thinking, I was very poor at the sciences, but I was pretty good at the arts, of English and Latin and that sort of thing. I think I might get a job in one of the offices at the 3 collieries in Seam Harbour, or possibly in one of the offices of the co-ops. I said, that was until about 3 weeks ago. But my dad, who was reading the Labour paper, Daily Herald at home, he says, "Oh, this sounds like you." He was reading a feature by Dudley Barker, with whom I was later to work, how to become a young reporter, a cub reporter. He says, "This sounds like you. Pretty good at English, interested in current affairs, what goes on in life." He says, "This sounds like you." So I tell Mr. Graham, the headmaster, that about that. He says, "Well," he said, "I've had a call from the report of Seam office of the Sunderland Echo, and he wants his first junior reporter, so you'd be interested." I said, "Oh, yes." I saw Mick Brown, Mr. Brown with an E, finally, that night. I saw Tommy Holden, the editor of the Sunderland Echo, the following day, and I knew what I'd be doing when I left school. In fact, when Mr. Holden said to me, "When could you start?" I thought, "Oh," I'm thinking, I could get out of sitting my exams here. I said, oh, straight away. But he said, oh, I think you better go back, just in case you don't like it or we don't like you. But my dad wouldn't have let me leave school before getting qualification anyway. And I went back to school, and from then on the lads were calling me Scoop, because I was going to be a reporter. And I was actually reporting, before I left school, I was reporting cricket at Seam Harbour for the Sunderland Echo. And I started at the Sunderland Echo in the July when I left, and I've been a journalist all my life. I still write for the Sunderland football match programme. That's me only main writing nowadays. But I'm always grateful to Mr. S.B. Graham, Mr. Basil Graham, for picking me out. I mean, if he didn't know that about my journalistic interest then. But I'll tell you this, we didn't have career masters or career people, advisors then. Didn't need one when he was as perceptive as that. It made a wonderful change to an assurance of my life. And I've loved being a reporter. If I'd been well off, I would have done what I did for nought.
And is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about?
I think I've covered things pretty well. I haven't mentioned about, I was in the army. I did my national service. At the age of 18, I'm working at the Sunderland Echo. But of course, in those days, there was national service conscription. I knew I would be called up, and sure enough, I was 18 in the September. And then in the February, I've got to go to Fort George, Inverness, to train with the Highland Brigade. And I did 10 weeks basic training. Then I was with the Highland regiments, but I was badged under the Royal Army Educational Corps. That's what I put down as a preference, because of my wonderful my school certificate. Somehow I managed to persuade them that I should be given a chance in the Royal Army Educational Corps. I had a 3-month course, and somehow I got through, and I was expected to be a teacher in the army, teaching lads how to read and write and that type of thing. Anyway, those who qualified on that course, if I'd failed the course, I could well have gone to Korea and had to fight in Korea with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, or in Malaya with the Gordon Highlanders. Anyway, I got through, and there was lads who wanted an overseas posting. The postings were put in a bury, an army bury, and we had to pick out our posting. And I picked out BTA. And the young lieutenant who was our instructor, he says, "You're lucky, so-and-so." I said, "Oh, where am I going?" He says, "You're going to Austria. British troops in Austria, BTA." And anyway, I'm travelling. I travelled on the ship from Harwich to the Hook of Holland. Then I got a train down to Klagenfurt in Austria, to Villach, and then on to Klagenfurt. And I get off this lorry at Klagenfurt. The very first person I see is, I recognise him, it's Tony Davison from Semi. He was in the year above me at Ryhope Grammar School. He said, first question, "Have you got your boots?" And he didn't mean army boots. He meant football boots. I said, "Oh yeah, I've got them." He says, "You're playing tomorrow." He'd seen at the postings, he knew I was going to arrive. And I was literally playing the next day. And he said, "Right, I'll show you to the billet." And he's showing me to the sergeant's quarters in Jaeger Barracks, Klagenfurt. He said, "Oh, by the way, I've got a canny job for you." I said, "Oh, what's that, Tony?" He says, "You'll be running the army newspaper." I could have cuddled him, you know. I was dreading having to teach, because I was hopeless teacher. Somehow I'd managed to get through that course. But anyway, I was producing the army newspaper, the British Troops in Austria Weekly Journal, BTA Weekly Journal. I've still got all the copies that I produce in a folder, again up in the loft. And so I enjoyed my time in Austria, as you can imagine. I was there last year, actually. I went back with my younger daughter. I saw the barracks where I was billeted. and I enjoyed myself. In season, I played football twice a week, cricket twice a week, as well as producing this newspaper. And I mean, I saw England win in the Prater Stadium, Vienna. They beat a very good team there in Austria. They beat them 3-2. Nat Lofthouse got the winning goal. Nat Lofthouse, dubbed by Desmond Hackett in the Daily Express as the Lion of Vienna. I was there, and I've talked about that sort of thing with the late Nat Lofthouse.